January 28, 1975, 6:17 a.m. Teaneck, New Jersey. Frank Lucas stands in his master bathroom wearing silk pajamas and holding $2.4 million in uncut diamonds. Outside, 112 federal agents are 30 seconds from breaking down his door. The diamonds don't sparkle. They're ugly, raw. The kind of stones that come from Sierra Leone blood mines and get smuggled in diplomatic pouches. 11 stones, each one the size of a grape. Each one worth more than a Harlem brownstone. Frank hears the battering ram hit the front door. He has two choices. Two futures. Two different ways to die. Keep the stones, fight the case with invisible money, bribe judges, buy silence, stay king. But if they find them, add 20 years for money laundering, 20 years in a federal cage, or flush them into the New Jersey sewer system and trust that someday, somewhere, someone will inherit his empire's blood money. Frank Lucas makes the impossible choice, the choice that separates kings from corpses. He opens his fist over the toilet bowl, 11 diamonds fall into dirty water, an empire's ransom disappearing into the pipes beneath 987 Sheffield Road. Frank hits the handle. The water swirls. The stones vanish. 3 seconds later, the bathroom door explodes inward. Federal agents flood in, guns drawn, screaming orders. They find Frank Lucas washing his hands. Calm. Clean. Empty-handed. Where are they, Frank? He doesn't answer. The silent man lives. The loud man dies. For 20 years, those diamonds sit in the dark, trapped in a corroded pipe junction 2 miles downstream. While Frank rots in federal prison, turning informant, betraying cops, surviving on reputation and fear, his retirement fund sleeps in sewage and silence. Until March 15, 1995. Ray DeLuca is 62 years old, union plumber. Bad back. Mortgage 3 months behind. He's called to fix a simple drain backup in a Harlem brownstone. The building used to be something. Now it's just old pipes and older secrets. Ray cuts open a section of cast iron that hasn't been touched since the Nixon administration. Black sludge pours out. Then something else. Something that catches the morning light and makes his heart stop. A diamond. Then another. Then 9 more. Ray DeLuca doesn't know he's holding Frank Lucas's escape plan in his calloused hands. He doesn't know these stones were bought with blue magic heroin and flushed during the biggest drug bust in American history. He doesn't know that finding them will put a target on his back and force him to make the same impossible choice Frank made 20 years ago. Keep the fortune and risk everything. Or walk away and stay invisible. This isn't a story about luck. This is a story about the price of being king and what happens when a nobody inherits a legend's crown. Harlem, 1968. The world is burning. Martin Luther King is dead. The riots rage outside. But inside the Flash Inn, the air is still, thick with cigar smoke and the mathematics of power. Frank Lucas stands in the corner, 38 years old, invisible. He drives Bumpy Johnson's Cadillac, carries his bags, remembers faces. Nobody knows his name. That's exactly how Bumpy wants it. Bumpy Johnson sits in his booth, dying one breath at a time. Congestive heart failure. The doctors gave him 6 months. That was 8 months ago. The oxygen tank beside him hisses like an angry snake. Every word costs him. Every lesson might be his last. Frank moves closer when Bumpy taps the table twice. The signal. Time for school. You see them Italians over there? Bumpy nods toward 3 men in expensive suits, laughing too loud at the corner table. They think they kings. Frank glances over, then back. They run everything uptown, Bump. They don't run nothing. Bumpy's voice is gravel and wisdom. They rent. Big difference between owning a throne and paying tax to sit on it. The oxygen tank hisses louder. Bumpy leans forward. You want to know the problem with the mafia? They middlemen. They buy heroin from the French at 10% purity. Step on it until it's 3% garbage. Tax every hand that touches it. By the time it hits these streets, they selling sugar and chalk for gold prices. Frank absorbs every word like scripture. This is the lesson he's been waiting for his entire life. You want a throne, boy? Bumpy's eyes lock onto Frank's. Go to the source. Cut out the Italians. But stay quiet. The loud man dies loud. The silent man becomes legend. Bumpy reaches into his jacket with trembling fingers. He pulls out a small velvet pouch and spills the contents onto the scarred wooden table. 2 stones. Ugly. Cloudy. They look like broken glass. Know what this is? Frank studies them. Rocks? Bumpy smiles for the first time in months. This is freedom, boy. This is how a king stays invisible. He picks up 1 stone, holds it to the dim light. Cash can be seized. Bank accounts frozen. Property confiscated. The feds can trace a dollar bill from here to Hong Kong. But these? He closes his fist around the stones. These don't have serial numbers, don't have names, don't testify in court. Frank leans closer. How much? These 2? $50,000. Maybe more. Bumpy's voice drops to a whisper. I've been converting paper into stones for 20 years. Every prophet that can talk, I change into something that, when the raid comes, they find crumbs. Not the bakery. The lesson burns into Frank's mind, not just the heroin trade, the insurance policy, the exit strategy. Diamonds are a king's blood, Bumpy continues. You hide them right, nobody can touch them. Not the feds, not the mafia, nobody. But Frank is hungry. 38 years old and still carrying bags, he wants to move fast. Build big. Make noise. He wants what Nicky Barnes has. Recognition. Fear. Respect. Bumpy sees it in his eyes. The impatience. The ego. Patience builds empires, he warns. Ego destroys them. Remember that when the time comes. 3 weeks later, Bumpy Johnson collapses in Wells' restaurant. Heart attack over a plate of fried chicken. The king is dead. The funeral is a war council disguised as grief. Every hustler in Harlem shows up. Numbers runners, pimps, enforcers, and in the back, wearing dead eyes and expensive suits, 3 mafia representatives. Taking notes, counting heads, measuring weak. Frank stands by the casket in a plain black suit. No tears, just calculation. He's inherited a kingdom with no army. Bumpy's empire was built on relationships, and those relationships died with him. The Italians are already circling. The young hustlers are getting loud. Frank has 2 choices: bend the knee and become another middleman, or do what Bumpy taught him. Go to the source. Standing over Bumpy's body, Frank makes his decision. 2 months later, Frank Lucas boards Pan Am Flight 841 to Bangkok. It's 1969. The Vietnam War is perfect cover for a man who wants to disappear. In his cheap suitcase, $50,000 in cash wrapped in newspaper. In his pocket, Bumpy's final gift. A contact name written on cigarette paper in shaky handwriting. 1 name, 1 chance, 1 shot at building an invisible empire. As Frank's plane lifts off from JFK, we cut to Little Italy, a restaurant basement. 5 capos sitting around espresso cups and cigarette ash, the 5 families discussing the Bumpy situation. The boy thinks he can go around us, one says, fat and confident. Bumpy's driver, nobody even knows his name. The oldest capo, smarter than the rest, shakes his head. That's what worries me. The ones you don't know are the dangerous ones. They laugh. They have no idea Frank Lucas is already 30,000 feet in the air, flying toward their extinction. Let's see how invisible he stays, the fat one says, lighting a fresh cigar. The silent man is about to become legend, and the loud men are about to learn what invisibility costs. Bangkok, 1969. The heat doesn't just hit you, it tries to digest you. 110 degrees of humidity that feels like breathing through wet concrete. Frank Lucas steps off Pan Am Flight 841 wearing the same black suit he wore to Bumpy's funeral. He looks like a preacher who took a wrong turn into hell. Frank is an anomaly here, a black man from North Carolina walking into the Golden Triangle during the height of the Vietnam War. No military credentials, no CIA badge, no Italian sponsors. Just hunger and $50,000 in cash wrapped in newspaper inside a cheap leather suitcase. The Golden Triangle sits where Thailand, Laos, and Burma collide in a three-way handshake of corruption. Poppy fields stretch beyond the horizon. Chinese suppliers have controlled this trade for 3 centuries. They don't need partners, they don't trust outsiders, and they definitely don't do business with nobodies from Harlem. Frank doesn't care about their history. He cares about their product. The meeting happens in a warehouse outside Chiang Mai. No windows, one door. Armed guards who look like they've been killing people since childhood. Frank walks in alone, carrying his suitcase like it contains the crown jewels. Across a wooden table sits his contact, the name Bumpy wrote on cigarette paper before he died. The Chinese supplier studies Frank with ancient eyes. You have no reputation here. No protection, no army. The Italians pay us well. Why should we risk our routes for you? Frank sets the suitcase on the table, opens it. $50,000 in neat stacks. Hundreds, 50s, 20s. All real, all immediate. The Italians pay on credit, Frank says, his voice steady as stone. They promise, they negotiate. They owe. I pay cash, every time. No debt, no leverage, just business. The room goes silent. Cash speaks louder than fear. Cash doesn't lie or make promises it can't keep. The supplier picks up a stack of bills, examines them, holds one to the light. How much you want? Everything you got. 98% pure, direct from source. No mafia tax. It's audacity wrapped in mathematics. Most dealers buy kilos. Frank wants tons. They negotiate for 6 hours. No threats, no anger, just cold arithmetic. By sunset, Frank Lucas has bypassed the Italian mafia and connected directly to the source. But buying the product is the easy part. Moving it 7,000 miles across an ocean while a war rages is the impossible part. Frank's solution is genius and grotesque. His cousin, stationed in Vietnam, has access to military transport. Every week, aluminum coffins leave Da Nang bound for Dover Air Force Base. Inside are American boys who died fighting for democracy. They fly home with full military honors, flags draped, salutes given, silence observed. Nobody checks the coffins of heroes. Frank pays off the right quartermasters. They build false bottoms into the shipping crates. Beneath the bodies of the fallen, Frank packs bricks of 98% pure heroin. White gold riding piggyback on death. The most sacred and profane pipeline in criminal history. Empires are never clean. The first shipment arrives in Newark 3 months later. 5 kilos of the purest heroin ever to touch American soil. Frank opens the package in a Harlem safe house with hands that don't shake. This is the moment that separates kings from pretenders. He could sell it pure. Flood New York overnight, become the loudest name in the drug game. But loud men die loud. Frank remembers Bumpy's lesson about invisibility. He cuts the heroin to 12% purity, still 4 times stronger than anything the mafia sells, still potent enough to hook every addict in 5 boroughs. But controlled, measured, smart. He brands it Blue Magic. The name spreads like religion. Within 6 months, every corner in Harlem is asking for it by name. Junkies abandon Italian heroin for the blue tape, the real product, the legend. Frank's revenue explodes, $100,000 a week, then 200. He's moving product faster than the mafia ever dreamed. And nobody knows his name. But the Italians notice their profits dropping. Street corners going quiet, customers disappearing. Something is killing their business, and they want answers. A sit-down is called. The 5 families gather in a restaurant basement in Little Italy. The question on the table is simple. Who is cutting into their business? Who owns Blue Magic? One capo has done his homework. There's a name, Frank Lucas. Used to drive for Bumpy Johnson. The room erupts in laughter. A driver? A nobody? Impossible. But the oldest capo isn't laughing. Find him. Bring him here. Let's see if he's smart or just lucky. Frank Lucas is about to sit across from the most dangerous men in America. They want tribute. They want him to bend the knee. But Frank didn't smuggle heroin in coffins to become another middleman. He came to take the throne. And the 5 families are about to learn what happens when you underestimate the silent man. Frank Lucas is a ghost with a fortune. By 1972, his invisible empire generates $100 million in annual revenue. $100 million flowing through his hands like water through a dam he built in silence. But if you walked past him buying groceries in Teaneck, New Jersey, you wouldn't look twice. That's the entire strategy. While the mafia throws parties at the Copacabana and buys politicians champagne dinners, Frank Lucas lives like a suburban accountant. Split-level house, beige siding, American flag on the porch. He drives a 1967 Ford sedan, brown and boring as dirt, wears off-the-rack suits from Sears, no jewelry except a simple Timex his wife gave him for Christmas. Nobody knows his name. That's how he stays king. Frank's empire is built on 2 principles Bumpy Johnson carved into his soul: family and silence. Only his brothers handle distribution. His youngest brother moves product in Harlem. His middle brother runs Newark. His cousins control the Bronx and Brooklyn. No outsiders, no friends, no partnerships with strangers who might develop loose tongues under federal pressure. Blood doesn't testify against blood. That's the mathematics of survival. Every dollar flows back to Frank through channels so clean the FBI can't trace them. But Frank remembers Bumpy's final lesson echoing in his head every time he sees a stack of paper money. Cash can be seized, bank accounts frozen, property confiscated. The feds can follow a dollar bill from Harlem to Hong Kong. But stones? Stones don't have serial numbers. Every month, Frank converts $300,000 in cash into untraceable insurance. He flies to Sierra Leone, lands on dirt strips carved out of jungle, carrying duffel bags filled with American currency. The meetings happen in compounds guarded by child soldiers with dead eyes and AK-47s. Frank sits across from warlords who've been trading blood and carbon since before America was born. The diamonds come out on dirty cloth, uncut, cloudy, covered in African earth. To an untrained eye, they look like broken glass. To Frank, they're freedom wrapped in carbon. This, Frank says, pointing at a stone the size of a grape, buys you more guns, more territory, more power. He slides cash across a wooden table scarred by machete marks. And this, he taps the diamond, keeps mine invisible. The transactions are pure arithmetic, paper for stone, noise for silence. Thousands of diamonds flow into Frank's possession over 3 years. He doesn't keep them in safes or vaults. Safes can be cracked. Vaults can be subpoenaed. Banks keep records. Frank hides them in the bones of his ordinary life. False panels behind bedroom closets. Hollow furniture legs beneath floorboards that creak like any other suburban home. And the most valuable stones, wrapped in waterproof pouches, disappear into the plumbing system where no federal warrant will ever reach. His house becomes a vault the government doesn't know exists. But discipline has an enemy. And that enemy wears custom suits and drives Ferraris. Nicky Barnes used to understand the rules, used to be smart, but success poisoned him the way fame poisons every man who mistakes attention for respect. By 1973, Nicky is everywhere the cameras flash. Magazine covers calling him Mr. Untouchable. Nightclub VIP sections. Dating models who pose for pictures with his diamond-encrusted watch catching every light. Frank watches one of those interviews on the small television in his kitchen, disgusted. Nicky laughing, joking about hypothetical drug dealers while practically confessing to federal crimes with a smile. Frank calls a meeting. Just the two of them. A diner in Queens at 3 a.m. when honest people are asleep and only predators prowl. The moment they know your name, Frank says, stirring coffee he won't drink, you're already dead. You just don't know it yet. Nicky laughs, loud, arrogant, the sound of a man who's forgotten that empires fall faster than they rise. You're jealous, Frank. I got what every man wants. Respect, fear, recognition. Frank stands up, drops a $5 bill on the Formica table. I got what every smart man wants. Freedom, you got noise. That's the last warning Nicky Barnes will ever receive. Frank cuts him off completely. No more blue magic. No protection. No second chances. The partnership dies in that diner, and Frank knows exactly how this story ends. The loud man always dies loud. While Frank manages his family empire and Nicky chases magazine covers, someone else is watching the mathematics of the street. Detective Richie Roberts. Essex County Prosecutor's Office. The one honest cop in a city where corruption flows like tap water, Roberts found $987,000 in unmarked bills in a car trunk last year and turned every dollar in to evidence. His fellow officers hate him for it. But Roberts notices patterns nobody else sees. The Italian heroin is disappearing from street corners, replaced by something stronger, something purer, blue magic. And the dealers selling it aren't connected to any known mafia families. They're country boys from North Carolina with no criminal records and family names that trace back to tobacco farms. Roberts starts building a file. Surveillance photos, wiretap transcripts, informant reports. He's looking for the invisible man at the center of the web, patient enough to wait years for one mistake. Frank's empire peaks in 1974, $100 million in annual revenue. He controls 80% of East Coast heroin distribution. 80%. The mafia has been reduced to regional scraps and local territories. Frank Lucas has accomplished what no black man in American history ever dared attempt. He's taken the throne without asking permission. But empires don't collapse from outside pressure. They implode from internal rot. Nicky Barnes, desperate and broke after Frank's amputation, starts making phone calls to federal agents. Not full cooperation, just enough information to buy protection. Names, locations, patterns. He's trying to trade intelligence for immunity, but what he's really doing is lighting the fuse on Frank's invisible kingdom. And then Frank makes his one mistake. The mistake that separates kings from legends. March 8, 1971. Madison Square Garden. The fight of the century. Muhammad Ali versus Joe Frazier. The entire world is watching. Every celebrity, politician, and gangster with money enough for a ticket sits in those seats. Frank doesn't want to go. Public places make his skin crawl. But his wife insists. She buys him a gift. A full-length chinchilla coat with matching hat. Custom made. $150,000 worth of pure, undeniable arrogance. Just this once, she says. You work like a dog. Let them see you've won. Frank looks at that coat hanging in his closet. He hears Bumpy's voice in his head. The loud man dies loud. The silent man becomes legend. But he's beaten everyone. The Italians, the system, the streets. Why shouldn't a king wear his crown for one night? He puts on the coat. Frank Lucas walks into Madison Square Garden wearing $150,000 worth of ego and takes a front row seat. Better seats than senators, better seats than mafia bosses who've been buying politicians since Prohibition. 20 rows back, Detective Richie Roberts scans the crowd with binoculars, more interested in faces than the fight. He sees the coat. Impossible to miss. He sees the man wearing seats that cost more than Roberts makes in 5 years. Roberts zooms in, snaps a photograph with his department-issued camera. The shutter clicks. That sound is the beginning of the end. The ghost has just become visible. The silent man has just screamed his name to a world full of federal agents with cameras and long memories. And somewhere in the shadows, Nicky Barnes watches, desperate and angry, ready to tell anyone who will listen exactly who that man in the chinchilla coat really is. The invisible empire is about to burn. And it all starts with a photograph of a king who forgot that crowns are targets. The fur coat was never just a coat. It was prophecy stitched in chinchilla and lined with arrogance. One mistake. That's all it takes to topple an empire built on silence. One moment where vanity screams louder than wisdom. For Frank Lucas, that moment costs $150,000 and weighs 15 pounds of pure ego draped across his shoulders. March 8, 1971. The fight of the century. Alley versus Frazier at Madison Square Garden. Frank doesn't want to go. Every instinct Bumpy Johnson carved into his soul tells him to stay home. Stay quiet. Stay invisible. But his wife insists. She buys him the coat as proof they've won. Custom chinchilla with matching hat. More expensive than houses. More dangerous than bullets. Frank puts it on and walks into the garden like a king announcing his coronation. Front row seats. Better than senators. Better than the Italian capos who've been buying politicians since Prohibition. For 3 hours, Frank Lucas is the loudest man in America without saying a word. 20 rows back, Detective Richie Roberts isn't watching the fight. He's hunting faces through binoculars, cataloging power in a room full of predators. He stops on the man in the impossible coat. Roberts knows every player in New York, every made man, every hustler with enough juice to afford ringside seats. He doesn't know this man. That's the problem. Roberts snaps a photograph with his department-issued camera. The shutter clicks like a judge's gavel. That sound is the beginning of the end. The photograph lands on Roberts' desk the next morning like a signed confession. A black man nobody recognizes, wearing wealth that screams empire, sitting where only kings sit. Roberts develops the film in his basement darkroom at 2 a.m, watching the image emerge in chemical solution. The coat materializes first, then the face, then the question that will consume the next 4 years of his life. Who is he? Roberts starts where lazy cops stop. He follows the mathematics. Those seats cost $5,000 each. Paid in cash. No credit cards, no checks. Just anonymous money flowing through box office channels that lead nowhere, but money always leaves traces if you dig deep enough. Within 2 weeks, Roberts has a name. Frank Lucas. Former driver for Bumpy Johnson. No criminal record. Lives in Teaneck, New Jersey. Drives a Ford sedan. On paper, Frank is nobody. But that coat says he's somebody worth $100 million in annual revenue. Roberts builds the case like constructing a cathedral, one stone at a time. Patient. Methodical. Righteous. He gets federal task force authorization. Wiretap warrants. Surveillance teams. Within 6 months, he has microphones in Frank's phones and cameras watching his house in rotating shifts. The investigation spreads like cancer through Frank's invisible empire. Roberts discovers Frank's brothers moving through Harlem, Newark, and the Bronx in coordinated patterns too clean to be accidental. He finds Frank's cousins handling money in mathematical sequences that spell out guilt in federal court language. But Roberts isn't the only hunter circling Frank's throne. Nicky Barnes, desperate and broke after Frank severed him completely, sits in federal interview rooms trading intelligence for immunity. Not full cooperation yet, just enough names to buy protection. Enough details to confirm what the wiretaps suggest. Nicky is lighting the fuse on Frank's Kingdom One, whispered secret at a time. Frank feels the change in the air before he sees the evidence. The city inhales and holds its breath. Junkies start mentioning raids. His spots get hit too clean, like someone drew the cops a roadmap. Cars parked too long on familiar corners. Phone calls develop strange clicks and echoes. Frank knows what that pressure means. The storm has started, and he's standing in the center of the target. He moves fast, but not frantically. Kings don't run, they choose how they fall. Frank starts liquidating everything. Cars sold to shell companies, properties transferred to offshore accounts. Cash converted to diamonds following Bumpy's final lesson about stones that don't testify. But it's too late. The betrayal is already complete. The warrant is already signed. January 28, 1975, 6:17 a.m., Teaneck, New Jersey. Frank wakes up in the dark before the knock comes. Old hustler instinct. Something in the silence is wrong. Too still. He swings his feet to the bedroom floor and feels it in his bones like approaching thunder. It's over. He moves to the hidden compartment behind his closet, pulls out 11 velvet pouches, opens them on the bathroom counter. 11 uncut diamonds spill out like ugly truth. Worth $2.4 million in 1975 money. His entire insurance policy, his proof that a nobody from North Carolina built an empire higher than the 5 families ever imagined. Outside, tires roll over winter gravel. Car doors slam in coordinated sequence. The sound of 112 federal agents forming a perimeter around his life. Frank stands in his master bathroom wearing silk pajamas, holding his legacy in one trembling hand. These stones are more than money. They're his crown, his escape plan, his evidence that he beat the Italians at their own game and made them irrelevant. The bullhorn crackles outside. Frank Lucas. This is the FBI. We have a warrant. His wife calls his name from the hallway, voice thin with terror. His children whisper downstairs, sensing the electricity in the air. The house feels smaller by the second, walls closing in like a federal trap. Frank stares into the toilet bowl. Plain white porcelain. Ordinary, humiliating. This is his final battlefield. He hears the battering ram rolling up the front walk. Steel against wood. Government against king. This is the real war. Not black versus Italian, not empire versus law. It's ego versus survival. Legacy versus family. If he keeps the diamonds and they find them, that's 20 extra years for money laundering. Asset concealment. Proof he never intended to leave the life. They'll bury him in federal concrete until his bones turn to dust. If he flushes them, he walks into that arrest with empty hands. Just another aging hustler with no proof of wealth. Maybe he can negotiate. Maybe he can survive. But the crown? The legacy? Gone, washed into New Jersey sewage with everything he built. The battering ram crashes into the front door. Boom. Frank thinks about Bumpy's final lesson in that smoky back room. The loud man dies loud. The silent man becomes legend. The coat was loud, keeping these stones would be louder. Frank opens his fist over the toilet bowl. Plink, plink, plink. 11 diamonds hit the water like tears from a dying empire. 2.4 million in silent wealth disappearing into the pipes beneath 987 Sheffield Road. Frank hits the handle, the water swirls, the stones vanish into darkness. 2 seconds later, the bathroom door explodes inward. Federal agents flood the room, guns leveled at his chest, veins popping in their necks as they scream orders that blend into meaningless noise. Hands, get down. Where are they, Frank? Frank raises his hands, calm, clean. Empty. I don't know what you're talking about. They arrest him in his pajamas, handcuff him in front of his crying children, read him rights he already knows by heart. The neighbors peek from behind curtains as the king of Harlem leaves his castle in chains, barefoot in the winter air. The feds tear his house apart for 3 days, rip open walls, pull up floorboards, dismantle furniture piece by piece. They bring in dogs trained to smell money, metal detectors, borescopes to peer inside pipes and ducts. They find cash, documents, evidence enough to convict him 10 times over. They never find the diamonds. Frank Lucas is charged with conspiracy, drug trafficking, and money laundering. He faces 70 years in federal prison. 70 years. A life sentence with extra decades stapled on for disrespect. Sitting in a fluorescent interrogation room, Frank stares across a metal table at Richie Roberts. Hunter and prey. Predator and predator. 2 men who studied the same city through opposite lenses. You're done, Frank, Roberts says quietly. No gloating. Just mathematics. 70 years. You'll die in there. For the first time, Frank isn't thinking about power or thrones or respect. He's thinking about oxygen, about days, about grandchildren he'll never meet if he plays this wrong. He's already made one sacrifice for his family. Flushed. 2.4 million in silence down a toilet to keep them safe. The question now is simple and poisonous. Is he willing to flush his reputation too? Who do you want? Frank finally asks. The names pour out like blood from a severed artery. Corrupt cops who took his bribes for decades. Rival dealers, warehouse owners, bankers, judges, dozens of careers, hundreds of lives, entire systems of corruption rotting beneath the surface of American justice. Frank opens his mouth and sells them all. The king becomes a rat. The silent man starts singing, and with every name he gives, another year falls off his sentence. 70 becomes 15. 15 becomes 7 with good behavior. The streets call him traitor. Judas. Snitch. But Frank doesn't care about street reputation anymore. He cares about walking free before he's too old to remember what freedom feels like. He serves 7 years. Gets out in 1981. Disappears into witness protection with a new name and a government pension. The empire is dead. The reputation is destroyed. The legend is buried in federal paperwork and informant files. But somewhere beneath the streets of New Jersey, in corroded pipes filled with 20 years of sewage and silence, 11 diamonds wait in the dark. 2.4 million in untraceable wealth that Frank Lucas flushed away to save his family. The invisible empire is gone. The king is a ghost. But the crown stays buried, waiting for someone else to inherit a legend's burden. The question that echoes in the silence is eternal. If you build a kingdom on blood, and then betray every knight who helped you climb, were you ever, really, a king at all? Or were you just a man who learned the hardest lesson of power? Sometimes staying alive costs everything that made life worth living. Time moves different for kings and nobodies, for legends and plumbers, for the streets that remember blood and the suburbs that forget everything. 20 years pass like a slow tide washing over history. Frank Lucas serves his 7 years, walks out of federal prison in 1981 wearing donated clothes and carrying nothing, and disappears into witness protection like smoke dissolving into American anonymity. The king becomes a phantom. The legend becomes a cautionary tale whispered in barbershops and prison yards where old hustlers remember when the snow was pure and the thrones were black. The house at 987 Sheffield Road in Teaneck, New Jersey, doesn't remember its master. Houses never remember their sins. It changes hands 4 times between 1981 and 1995. Each family inherits the same chronic problem: plumbing that gurgles and groans like something dying in the walls, drains that back up without warning, toilets that refuse to flush properly. Nobody connects the symptoms to a January morning in 1975 when Frank Lucas flushed $2.4 million in diamonds into pipes that weren't designed to carry a king's ransom. By March 1995, the house belongs to the Hendersons, working-class family drowning in all the usual American ways. Mortgage 3 payments behind at $87,000 total debt, credit cards maxed, basement flooding every heavy rain because the main line backs up like a clogged artery in the heart of their dreams. They call Ray DeLuca, 62 years old, union plumber for 40 years, knees shot, back screaming every time he bends. His hands are scarred road maps of honest labor, calloused from fixing other people's problems while his own pile higher than hope. Ray is 3 months behind on his own mortgage. His daughter's college tuition bill sits on the kitchen table like a $40,000 threat he can't answer. His retirement pension will pay $1,800 monthly if his spine holds out 3 more months. Ray isn't looking for treasure, he's looking for survival. He arrives at Sheffield Road in a van held together by rust and union stickers, carrying a toolbox and the weight of every unpaid bill in America. The basement smells like defeat and wet concrete. The pipe junction is corroded beyond salvation. Cast iron installed during the Nixon administration, now dying 1 drip at a time. Ray fires up the reciprocating saw. Metal screams against metal in the darkness. Sparks fly like angry stars. He cuts through a section of pipe that hasn't seen daylight since Frank Lucas was king of anything. The iron gives way. Black sludge pours onto the dirt floor. 20 years of accumulated filth and forgotten secrets. Ray steps back, cursing the smell that burns his nostrils and coats his throat. Then his work light catches something that doesn't belong in sewage, something that reflects the beam back with cold, hard brilliance. Ray reaches into the muck with gloved fingers. His heart does something strange in his chest. He pulls out a stone, cloudy, ugly, the size of a grape. Then another, and another. 11 stones total, sitting in his palm like teeth from a dead god's mouth. Ray DeLuca sits on a basement floor in Teaneck, New Jersey, holding what looks like broken glass, covered in 20 years of human waste. But his hands are shaking. His breath comes short. Because somewhere in his gut, beneath 4 decades of honest labor and union wages, he knows exactly what he's found. He drives to a jeweler in Newark the next morning, a 3rd-generation professional who can appraise greed by the way somebody walks through his door. But when Ray pours 11 dirty stones onto the velvet pad, the jeweler's face loses its training. He actually steps back. Uncut African diamonds, the jeweler whispers after examining each stone under proper light. High clarity. Sierra Leone origin. In today's market, you're looking at approximately $2.4 million. Maybe more. Ray DeLuca, who has $400 in his checking account, is suddenly holding more wealth than he's earned in his entire life. But money that big doesn't stay quiet. It screams. Within 72 hours, word leaks through old networks that still remember when Frank Lucas was legend. Phone calls start coming to Ray's house. Numbers he doesn't recognize. Voices that don't identify themselves. Heard you found something interesting. Those stones belong to someone. Be smart, Ray. Give them back before this gets complicated. Ray's wife, Maria, finds the diamonds on the 3rd night. She opens his toolbox looking for a screwdriver and discovers 11 stones that smell like sewage and look like damnation. "What are these?" she asks, voice already knowing the answer will destroy everything. Ray tells her everything. The pipe, the jeweler, the impossible choice sitting in their garage like a loaded gun. Maria doesn't hesitate. "These are blood money, Ray. You know what they are. You know where they came from. Frank Lucas killed people, destroyed families, flooded Harlem with poison. And you want to profit from that? Our mortgage is 3 months behind. I don't care. Sarah's tuition is due in 6 weeks. $40,000 we don't have. I don't care." Maria's voice cracks like breaking glass. "We're not criminals. We don't build our future on dead bodies and destroyed lives. You turn those in, or I leave. Tonight." The conflict isn't greed versus conscience, it's desperation versus morality. Ray isn't a bad man dreaming of yachts and mansions. He's a good man drowning in bills, watching his daughter's college dreams evaporate because he can't afford to keep promises he made when his back was younger and his pension seemed certain. But Maria is right. The stones are cursed, not supernaturally, practically. They carry Frank Lucas's choices like DNA. Every person who touches them inherits his enemies, his debts, his federal attention. Ray makes the call on the 4th day, not to a lawyer, not to a fence, to the FBI field office in Newark. "I found something. I think it's evidence from an old case." The federal response is immediate and overwhelming. Agents descend on his house like he's the criminal. They seize the diamonds as proceeds of crime, interrogate him for 6 hours about how he found them, who he told, whether he tried to sell them. They treat him like a suspect until his union lawyer threatens lawsuits. The government offers Ray a standard finder's fee. $25,000 before taxes. After the years takes their cut, Ray nets $16,700, enough to cover one mortgage payment and buy his daughter textbooks for 1 semester. $2.4 million. The diamonds disappear into a federal evidence locker in Manhattan, tagged, cataloged, waiting for the next legal battle over who owns a dead empire's assets. Frank Lucas, now 78 years old and living under his real name again, hears about the discovery through old contacts who still remember when he was king. A reporter tracks him down for one final interview in 2019, months before Frank dies of natural causes. "Mr. Lucas, a plumber found diamonds in a New Jersey pipe. Were those yours?" Frank smiles. Old man smile, tired, knowing, dangerous even in its weakness. "The silent man lives," he says, voice raspy with age and secrets. "The loud man dies. And sometimes the smart man hides his money where even he can't find it. Do you regret it? The empire? The betrayals? The violence?" Frank stares past the camera for a long moment, seeing ghosts, counting costs, remembering Bumpy Johnson's oxygen tank hissing in a Harlem bar 50 years ago, remembering a chinchilla coat that cost him everything. "I regret the coat," he finally whispers. Everything else was business, mathematics, survival. But that coat, that was ego, and ego kills more kings than bullets ever will. Frank Lucas dies on May 30th, 2019. No empire, no fortune, no crown. Just an old man with stories nobody believes and regrets that weigh more than diamonds. The stones stay in the evidence locker. Unclaimed, unwanted, waiting in the dark like everything else that once belonged to legends. Ray DeLuca retires 3 months later. His pension covers groceries. His daughter takes out student loans. His marriage survives. He's not rich. He's not a king. But he sleeps at night without hearing the screams of junkies who died for blue magic purity. And sometimes, silence is the only crown worth keeping.